Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason begins exactly where most fairy tale endings usually stop. Bridget finally got the man she wanted. Mark Darcy chose her, loves her, and seems like living proof that all the humiliation, cigarettes, calories, and emotional disasters of the first story were somehow worth it. But the movie understands something that most romance stories avoid. Falling in love is not the end of insecurity. Sometimes it is only the beginning of a whole new set of fears. Bridget has the relationship she dreamed about, yet almost immediately she starts wondering whether she can actually keep it. At the start, Bridget is happier than she has ever been and also more anxious. She and Mark are together now, and on paper that should settle everything. Mark is kind, intelligent, handsome, and dependable in exactly the way Daniel Cleaver never was. Bridget should be able to relax into this relationship and enjoy it. Instead, she begins obsessing over all the ways it could fall apart. She worries she is not glamorous enough, not polished enough, not sophisticated enough, and maybe not steady enough to deserve a man like Mark for long. These fears do not come from nowhere. Bridget has spent years feeling compared, judged, and found lacking by the world around her. So even after getting what she wanted, she still carries the old belief that love is fragile and that one wrong outfit, one wrong word, or one better woman walking into the room could take it away. The first major threat to Bridget's peace comes in the form of Rebecca Gillies, a beautiful, confident, athletic colleague in Mark's professional orbit. Rebecca seems to be everything Bridget is not. She is elegant without effort, calm where Bridget is chaotic, and physically at ease in her own body in a way Bridget finds almost offensive. Bridget instantly decides that Rebecca must be a romantic danger, and from that point on she starts reading every moment between Rebecca and Mark as proof that disaster is coming. Mark being Mark does not help enough. He is honest and serious, but he is also terrible at managing Bridget's spiraling imagination. He keeps assuming that quiet reassurance should be enough, while Bridget needs something much more explicit. Instead of calming her, his calm often makes her feel more foolish and more alone inside her fears. At the same time, Bridget is still working in television, and fate makes sure her past refuses to stay buried. Daniel Cleaver reappears in her professional life with all his old charm, all his old shamelessness, and all his old talent for making Bridget feel reckless. Daniel is still not trustworthy, but he is exciting, funny, and dangerously skilled at saying the exact thing that makes Bridget feel alive and desired. The contrast between Daniel and Mark becomes one of the major tensions in the story. Mark represents maturity, loyalty, and real love. Daniel represents temptation, ego, and the fantasy of being the kind of woman who always gets away with everything. Bridget is then sent on a work assignment that looks glamorous from the outside and is emotionally disastrous on the inside. She goes to Thailand to help cover a tourism segment, and Daniel is part of the trip. The whole setup is already dangerous because Bridget is feeling vulnerable in her relationship with Mark, insecure about Rebecca, and more susceptible than usual to Daniel's energy. Thailand becomes the perfect location for confusion, jealousy, and very bad judgment. Before the trip, Bridget's tension with Mark has already been building. Small misunderstandings turn into arguments. Rebecca is always nearby in Bridget's mind, even when she is not physically present. Bridget keeps imagining that Mark would be better off with a woman who knows how to move through the world without tripping over her own self-consciousness. Mark, meanwhile, keeps acting as if reason alone should solve emotional panic. He loves Bridget, but he often underestimates how deeply her insecurity can distort reality. By the time Bridget reaches Thailand, she is already emotionally shaky, and Daniel immediately starts exploiting that. He flirts, jokes, and brings back the same dangerous chemistry that ruined her before. Bridget knows exactly who Daniel is. She knows he lies. She knows he cheats. She knows he turns women into brief adventures and then leaves them to pick up the pieces. But Daniel does not tempt her because he is a mystery. He tempts her because he is familiar, and because at moments of self-doubt, familiar chaos can feel safer than the harder work of trusting something real. The Thailand section pushes the story into full romantic comedy chaos. Bridget gets pulled into awkward public moments, social embarrassments, and the kind of spiraling misunderstandings that seem to follow her like weather. There is a moment where she ends up in a humiliating public situation involving local cultural expectations and her own inability to stay composed under pressure. These scenes are funny in the broad Bridget Jones way, but underneath them is a serious emotional pattern. Every embarrassment reinforces the story Bridget already tells herself, that she is somehow the wrong woman for the life she wants. Then comes the major mistake. In a moment of weakness, confusion, and emotional loneliness, Bridget sleeps with Daniel again. This is the point where the film stops being merely about insecurity and becomes about consequences. Bridget has not just imagined a threat to her relationship, she has become one. What makes the scene matter is that it does not come from passion alone. It comes from a collapse in self-trust. Bridget feels unwanted, frightened, and stupid, and Daniel offers an immediate shallow version of comfort. She reaches for the familiar poison because at least she knows how it tastes. Of course, Daniel remains Daniel. The fantasy cracks almost immediately, and Bridget is left with guilt, regret, and the growing awareness that she may have destroyed the best thing in her life. The relationship with Mark, already strained, is now standing over a trapdoor Bridget helped build. Then the movie swerves into another kind of trouble. Bridget ends up carrying luggage connected to Daniel, and inside that luggage are drugs she knows nothing about. It is the kind of absurd catastrophe only Bridget could stumble into, except this time the stakes are very real. She is arrested in Thailand and thrown into prison, terrified, humiliated, and suddenly far from every system she relies on. This prison sequence changes the film in an important way. Up to this point, Bridget's crises have mostly been social, romantic, or emotional. Now she is isolated in a place where her usual defense mechanisms mean nothing. She cannot charm her way out. She cannot write a diary entry and redefine the situation. She is simply trapped, frightened, and forced to depend on the kindness of strangers. And interestingly, kindness is what she finds. The women in prison, despite the fear and hardship of the place, offer Bridget a kind of solidarity she does not expect. They help her, teach her how to survive the immediate environment, and remind the audience that Bridget's fundamental decency makes connection possible even in terrible circumstances. One of the quiet strengths of the movie is that Bridget, for all her self-obsession and panic, is not selfish at her core. She is vulnerable, yes, but she is also warm, and that warmth keeps drawing people toward her. Back in England, Mark learns what has happened. This is where the movie finally strips the story down to its emotional truth. All the suspicion, insecurity, jealousy, and damage fall away, and what remains is very simple. When Bridget is truly in trouble, Mark comes for her. He does not stand back and moralize. He does not ask whether she has behaved perfectly. He acts. He uses his intelligence, his legal skill, and his determination to get her out. In the clearest possible way, he proves that his love is not theoretical. It is practical, loyal, and real. Mark rescues Bridget from the disaster in Thailand, and once they are back in each other's orbit, the deeper truths start emerging. Bridget has to face what she did. Mark has to confront how much he failed to understand her fears before they exploded. The relationship cannot simply go back to what it was. Both of them now know that love is not maintained by attraction alone. It has to survive insecurity, bad decisions, humiliation, and forgiveness. At the same time, the truth about Rebecca comes into focus. Bridget has spent so much of the story imagining Rebecca as a romantic rival, only to learn that her suspicions were mostly built out of projection and panic rather than fact. Rebecca was never the threat Bridget made her into. That revelation matters because it shows how much pain Bridget creates by believing the worst about herself. If you are convinced you are not enough, every elegant woman in the room starts looking like a replacement. The Daniel problem also resolves in the only way it ever really could. Daniel remains charming, irresponsible, and fundamentally unserious. He is fun in brief doses and ruinous in real life. By the end of the film, Bridget finally sees that he does not represent passion so much as repetition. He is the old version of her romantic life, the one built on fantasy, ego, and avoidable heartbreak. Mark is not simply the better man because he behaves better. He is the better choice because being with him asks Bridget to live in reality instead of drama. The final stretch of the movie is about Bridget choosing that reality. She and Mark find their way back to each other not because the story forgets what happened, but because they decide the relationship is still worth the work. Mark has seen Bridget at her worst and stayed. Bridget has seen that real love can survive embarrassment and still feel like safety rather than judgment. There is a maturity in that reconciliation that the first movie only hinted at. This time, Bridget is not just hopping to be chosen. She is learning what it means to build something after both people have failed in different ways. The romantic ending arrives with the kind of comic warmth the Bridget Jones films do best. After all the jealousy, travel disasters, prison time lies, and emotional chaos Mark proposes, it is not framed as a perfect fairy tale conclusion because the movie knows Bridget too well for that. She is still Bridget. She is still messy, impulsive, too emotional, and slightly disaster-prone. But now the proposal means something bigger than simple romance. It means she has finally been loved not as a fantasy version of herself, but as the full chaotic human being she actually is. Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason works because it understands that insecurity does not disappear the second you get into a relationship. In fact, love often exposes every fear your hopping romance would cure. Bridget wants certainty so badly that she keeps sabotaging the very thing that could make her happy. She looks at other women and sees threats. She looks at herself and sees deficiencies. The movie is funny because of how wildly these anxieties explode in her hands, but it is emotionally true because those anxieties are recognizable. It also works because Mark Darcy remains the answer to a question Bridget has been asking since the first film. What does it actually look like to be loved well? Not admired briefly, not desired dramatically, not chased for excitement, but loved in a way that survives discomfort, imperfection, and bad timing. Mark keeps giving the same answer. It looks like showing up. It looks like honesty. It looks like choosing the real person over the ideal image. So Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason ends with romance, but not the naive kind. It ends with a woman who has once again embarrassed herself across multiple countries, once again mistaken panic for intuition, once again made a complete mess of her own happiness and still somehow arrived somewhere meaningful. Because under all the chaos, Bridget keeps moving toward the one thing she truly wants. Not perfection, not polish, just a life where she can be fully herself and still be loved. And at the end of this story, that life finally feels possible.